Upon finding an abandoned baby on Christmas Eve, she uncovered a devastating secret. The snow fell softly that Christmas Eve, blanketing the small town in a quiet stillness. Clara pulled her scarf tighter around her neck as she hurried down the deserted streets, her breath visible in the icy air. The twinkling lights in shop windows and the faint sound of holiday music drifting from a distant radio only served to remind her of the emptiness she felt. For years, Christmas had been nothing more than a hollow ritual, a day spent alone, nursing the ache of dreams she'd long since abandoned. As she turned the corner near her apartment, a faint, muffled sound made her pause. It was a cry, faint but unmistakable, cutting through the cold silence like an urgent plea. Clara stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding as she tried to locate the source. The sound came again, fragile and desperate, leading her to a narrow alley flanked by piles of trash and discarded boxes. She hesitated for a moment, the icy wind biting at her cheeks, before stepping cautiously into the dimly lit passage. Near the back of the alley, nestled among the shadows, she spotted something that made her chest tighten. A bundle, small, fragile, and shivering, was tucked against the wall. Her breath caught as she knelt beside it, carefully peeling back the thin, damp blanket to reveal a tiny baby. The infant's face was flushed from the cold, and his cries were weak but insistent, as if pleading for rescue. A note was tucked into the folds of the blanket, the paper crumpled and stained. With trembling fingers, Clara unfolded it and read the hurried scrawl. "Please, protect him. I have no choice. He is in danger." Clara's mind raced as she cradled the baby in her arms, his warmth a stark contrast to the bitter cold surrounding them. Who could have left him here? Why? The note's desperate tone sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter air. The baby stirred, his tiny hand grasping at the edge of her scarf, and Clara felt a wave of emotion so powerful it took her breath away. There was no time to think. She pulled her coat tighter around them both and rose to her feet, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. The alley remained still and empty, but the weight of the note's warning pressed heavily on her. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You're safe now. I promise." Hurrying back to her apartment, Clara felt her thoughts spinning wildly. The baby's soft cries filled the silence of her tiny home as she scrambled to find anything that might help. A small basket, hastily padded with towels, became a makeshift crib. She warmed a bottle of milk, her hands trembling as she held it to the baby's lips. As the infant's cries subsided and he began to drink, Clara felt a deep, unfamiliar ache in her chest. She had spent so many years longing for a child, enduring endless tests, treatments, and heartbreak, only to be told that motherhood wasn't in her future. And now, here he was, a fragile life left in her hands, as if placed there by fate itself. She stared at him, her heart swelling with a mix of awe and fear. "Who are you, little one?" she murmured, brushing a lock of dark hair from his tiny forehead. "And why would someone abandon you like this?" The note's words echoed in her mind, and Clara knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, the answers awaited. Answers to who this child was, why he had been left in such desperation, and what kind of danger might still be lurking. But in that moment, as the baby's breathing slowed and his small hand curled around her finger, Clara made a silent vow. Whatever had brought him to her, whatever dangers lay ahead, she would protect him, no matter what it took. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Clara's modest apartment, casting a warm glow on the tiny figure nestled in a basket near the sofa. The baby, now swaddled in a soft towel, was sound asleep, his delicate features softened by the peaceful rhythm of his breathing. Clara sat nearby, a steaming mug of tea in her hands, her eyes fixed on the infant with a mix of awe and trepidation. Her mind was a whirlwind. The note's words, the baby's desperate cries, the frigid alley, all of it lingered like a half-remembered nightmare. She hadn't slept, unable to tear her gaze away from him, afraid that if she closed her eyes, he might vanish like some fragile dream. The baby stirred, a faint whimper escaping his lips. Clara immediately set her mug down and leaned over, her movements hesitant but instinctive. "Hey, it's okay," she whispered, brushing her fingers lightly against his cheek. "I'm here." His dark eyes blinked open, unfocused but searching, and something in that gaze pierced through her. She couldn't explain it, but it felt like a connection, fragile and unspoken, yet undeniable. Clara had always been practical, her life defined by order and predictability. Dreams of motherhood had once colored her world, but after years of failed treatments and empty hope, she had locked those dreams away, unwilling to face the pain of longing for something she could never have. And yet, here he was. "Gabriel," she murmured, testing the name aloud. It felt right, as if the name had been waiting for him. "That's what I'll call you." She reached for the small bottle of formula she had prepared earlier, her movements careful but unsteady. Feeding him was an exercise in trial and error, but when he finally latched onto the bottle, a wave of relief washed over her. Watching him drink, his tiny hands clutching the edge of the towel, Clara felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. But the warmth was fleeting, overshadowed by questions that refused to be silenced. Who was his mother? What kind of danger had she been fleeing? And what kind of life had Gabriel narrowly escaped? Determined to find answers, Clara spent the day piecing together a plan. She called a close friend, Sarah, who worked as a nurse at the local clinic, hoping for guidance. "If someone's looking for him, they might come through the clinic," Sarah suggested. "I'll keep an ear out." Clara hesitated, the thought of losing Gabriel twisting her stomach. "Do you think his mother will come back for him?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But if she doesn't, you need to think about what's next for you. And for him." As the day stretched into evening, Clara ventured out briefly to buy supplies, diapers, formula, and a soft blanket that reminded her of the Christmases she used to dream of as a child. Every purchase felt like a step towards something terrifyingly permanent. Back at home, she arranged Gabriel's new belongings in a corner of her small bedroom. The sight of the crib she had hastily assembled, barely big enough for him, but sturdy and safe, made her chest tighten. For the first time, the enormity of what she was doing hit her. "This is crazy," she muttered, sinking onto the edge of her bed. "What do I know about raising a baby?" But then she looked at Gabriel, now snug in his new blanket, his tiny fist resting against his cheek as he slept. And in that moment, all her doubts quieted. She didn't have the answers, but she had a promise to keep him safe. Later that night, as the snow fell quietly outside, Clara sat by the window, the note still clutched in her hand. She read it again, each word heavy with desperation. "Please, protect him. I have no choice. He is in danger." The questions returned, sharper now. What kind of danger? Was someone looking for Gabriel? And if they were, how far would they go to find him? Her thoughts were interrupted by a noise from the hallway, a faint shuffling, followed by the creak of floorboards. Clara's body tensed as she listened, her heart pounding. She moved quietly to the door, peering through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the sound of retreating footsteps lingered. Clara's grip tightened on the note, a chill running down her spine. Whoever had left Gabriel in that alley had been running from something, or someone. And now, Clara realized that danger might be closer than she had imagined. The snowstorm from the night before had subsided, leaving the streets covered in a pristine, glittering white blanket. Inside Clara's apartment, the air was warm and filled with the faint scent of coffee. Gabriel lay snug in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with his steady breaths. Clara stood by the window, staring out at the world beyond, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. The sound of the footsteps in the hallway from the previous night still echoed in her thoughts. She had barely slept, her nerves frayed by the creeping realization that someone might already be searching for the baby. The note weighed heavily in her pocket, a haunting reminder of the mystery surrounding Gabriel. Determined to uncover the truth, Clara decided to act. She began her day by revisiting the alley where she had found him. The morning air was bitterly cold, stinging her cheeks as she retraced her steps. The alley was just as she remembered it, narrow, shadowed, and silent. The only traces of life were faint footprints in the snow, already beginning to fade. Clara crouched down, searching for anything she might have missed the night before. Among the scattered debris, her eyes caught a glimmer of something metallic. She reached out and uncovered a small, tarnished locket. It was delicate, shaped like a heart, and when she opened it, she found a photo inside. A young woman with tired but kind eyes, cradling a newborn baby. Her breath caught as she stared at the image. This had to be Gabriel's mother. She closed the locket carefully, her fingers trembling as a mix of emotions swirled within her. Sadness, anger, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. Who was this woman, and what had driven her to leave her child in such a state of desperation? The questions followed her as she made her way to the clinic to meet Sarah. When Clara showed her the locket, Sarah frowned deeply. "This woman looks familiar," she said, examining the photo closely. "I think she might have come to the clinic a few weeks ago." She was quiet, didn't say much, but now that I think about it, she looked scared. "Scared of what?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated, her expression darkening. "I don't know, but there was something about her." She kept glancing over her shoulder, like she thought someone was following her. And when she left, she didn't go out the front door. She slipped out the back. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Whoever this woman was, she had been running from something, or someone. As she left the clinic, Clara's thoughts churned with possibilities. If Gabriel's mother was in danger, what did that mean for him? And for her? She glanced down at the locket in her hand, its weight suddenly feeling much heavier. Back at the apartment, Clara found herself pacing the room while Gabriel napped. Her mind replayed every detail Sarah had shared, but it wasn't enough. She needed more information, and she knew the locket might hold the key. The next morning, Clara visited a local pawn shop in hopes of identifying the locket's origin. The shop was dimly lit and cluttered, filled with the faint smell of old metal and leather. Behind the counter, an older man with sharp eyes inspected the locket with careful precision. "This is handmade," he said, turning it over in his fingers. "Not something you'd find in a store. See this engraving?" He pointed to a tiny symbol etched into the back. "It's a maker's mark. There's only a handful of jewelers who still use this. If you're trying to trace it, I'd start with them." Armed with this new lead, Clara felt a spark of hope. She spent the next few days visiting local jewelers, asking about the locket, until one finally recognized the mark. "I made this years ago," the jeweler said, studying it closely. "It was commissioned by a man. He said it was for his wife, a gift to celebrate the birth of their child." The words sent a shiver through Clara. "Do you remember his name?" The jeweler shook his head. "It's been too long, but I do remember one thing." He insisted on including the engraving inside. Clara's heart raced as she opened the locket again. Beneath the photo, faint but visible, were the words, "Forever protected." The inscription only deepened the mystery. Was the man who commissioned the locket Gabriel's father? And if so, why had his mother fled? Clara's mind reeled with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. That night, as she sat by Gabriel's crib, she whispered softly, "Whoever your mother is, she loved you enough to risk everything. And I swear, I'll do the same." But as the hours passed and the apartment grew quiet, a shadow of unease settled over her. The footsteps in the hallway, the woman's fear, the cryptic note, it all pointed to something dark, something far from over. Clara's resolve hardened. Whatever danger Gabriel's mother had been running from, Clara knew it was only a matter of time before it caught up to them. And when it did, she would be ready. The days that followed were filled with an unrelenting sense of unease. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she and Gabriel were being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow outside the window, every unfamiliar car idling on the street set her on edge. The locket and its haunting inscription, "Forever protected," felt like both a promise and a warning. Gabriel, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him, had started to settle into his new life with Clara. His tiny smiles and the soft coos he made as he reached for her face became the light she clung to in the growing darkness. But the more Clara fell in love with the child, the more determined she became to uncover the truth. One cold evening, as Gabriel dozed in his crib, Clara sat by the window, her eyes scanning the quiet street below. She sipped her tea, the warmth doing little to calm the tension building in her chest. It was then that she noticed it. A dark sedan parked across the street, its engine running. Clara's heart sank. The car had been there earlier in the day, too. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside. She set her mug down and moved away from the window, her hands trembling. She reached for her phone and called Sarah, her voice low but urgent. "There's a car outside my apartment," she said. "It's been there for hours. I think someone is watching me. Are you sure?" Sarah asked, her concern palpable. "I'm not imagining this," Clara insisted. "Something's not right. What if it's connected to Gabriel's mother?" "Call the police," Sarah said firmly. Clara hesitated. She had considered it before, but what would she tell them? That she had found a baby in an alley and now believed someone was watching her? Without concrete evidence, she feared they wouldn't take her seriously. The next morning, Clara decided to take matters into her own hands. She bundled Gabriel in his warmest clothes and stepped out into the cold, determined to follow the trail wherever it led. The dark sedan was gone, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't far. Her first stop was the pawn shop where she had traced the locket. The shopkeeper remembered her immediately. "Did you find anything else about the locket?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. The man shook his head but leaned closer, his tone lowering. "Be careful, miss. Sometimes, things like this come with trouble. If someone wanted this locket back, they might not stop at asking nicely." Clara left the shop with a sinking feeling. She walked the streets aimlessly, her mind racing. If Gabriel's mother had been running from danger, then whoever had been chasing her might now be after Clara and the baby. As she turned a corner, she stopped abruptly. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, was a man in a dark coat. He wasn't doing anything overtly suspicious, but his gaze was fixed on her. Clara's stomach twisted. She turned and quickly walked in the opposite direction, her breath coming in short bursts. Back at the apartment, Clara locked the door behind her and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the oppressive sense of being followed lingered. She set Gabriel down gently in his crib and sat on the edge of her bed, trying to collect her thoughts. Later that evening, Clara heard a soft knock at the door. Her pulse quickened. She approached cautiously, her hand trembling as she peeked through the peephole. A man stood on the other side, a stranger with a sharp, angular face and an air of authority that sent alarm bells ringing in her head. "Miss," he called out, his voice calm but firm. "I just want to talk. I think you have something that belongs to me." Clara's breath caught. She didn't respond, stepping back silently as she clutched her phone in one hand. The man knocked again, harder this time. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, "but I can't leave without that baby." Her blood ran cold. She backed further into the apartment, her heart pounding as Gabriel stirred in his crib. The man knocked a third time, his voice growing impatient. "Miss, open the door." "I won't ask again." Clara dialed Sarah's number, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke. "Someone's here," she said. "He's asking for Gabriel." "Call the police," Sarah urged. Clara hung up and pressed the emergency number on her phone, her fingers trembling. She explained the situation as quietly as she could, her eyes darting between the door and Gabriel. The man outside seemed to sense what she was doing. "You don't understand," he said, his voice muffled through the door. "That baby doesn't belong to you. If you know what's good for you, you'll hand him over." Clara didn't respond, her hand gripping the phone tightly. Minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the street. The man cursed under his breath and disappeared down the hallway before the police arrived. When the officers questioned her, Clara explained everything. The note, the locket, the sedan, and now the man at her door. They took her statement seriously, but she could see the skepticism in their eyes. "Do you have any enemies?" one of the officers asked. "No," Clara said firmly, "but I think Gabriel's mother did." As the officers left, promising to patrol the area, Clara sat down and stared at the locket on the table. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they painted was more terrifying than she could have imagined. Whoever had been hunting Gabriel's mother was now hunting them, and Clara knew that this was only the beginning. The tension in Clara's apartment was suffocating. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every muffled voice from the hallway sent her heart racing. Gabriel, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around them, lay in his crib, his tiny fist curled near his cheek as he slept. Clara watched him with a mix of fear and determination. She had made a promise to protect him, and she wouldn't break it. But the man's words from the night before echoed in her mind. That baby doesn't belong to you. Who was he? What did he want with Gabriel? And, more disturbingly, how far would he go to get him? As the morning light crept through the windows, Clara knew she couldn't stay in the apartment. It wasn't safe. She packed a small bag with essentials, diapers, formula, the locket, and bundled Gabriel in his warmest clothes. Her hands trembled as she locked the apartment door behind her and stepped into the chilly air. Her first stop was Sarah's apartment. Sarah opened the door with a look of concern, ushering Clara inside quickly. "What happened?" she asked, glancing nervously at the hallway. Clara recounted everything. The man at her door, his demands, and the way he disappeared as soon as the sirens approached. Sarah's face grew pale as she listened. "This isn't just about Gabriel's mother anymore," she said. "Whoever this man is, he's not going to stop." "But why?" Clara whispered, holding Gabriel closer. What could they possibly want with him? Sarah hesitated, then pulled out her laptop. "If we're going to figure this out, we need more information. Let's start with the locket." Clara handed her the locket, its tarnished surface catching the light. Sarah studied the inscription and the photo inside before typing the jeweler's mark into a search engine. Minutes turned into hours as they sifted through records and articles, searching for any clue that might connect Gabriel's mother to the danger that seemed to follow him. Finally, Sarah froze. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling. "Look at this." On the screen was a news article from 6 months ago. The headline read, "Woman missing after reporting domestic abuse against prominent businessman." The photo attached was grainy but unmistakable. It was the woman from the locket, holding a baby in her arms. "That's her," Clara breathed. "That's Gabriel's mother." The article detailed how the woman, Anna, had filed a restraining order against a man named Victor Delgado, a wealthy and influential figure in the city. Anna had accused him of abuse and threatened to expose his illegal dealings. But shortly after the report was filed, she disappeared without a trace. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "Victor Delgado," she repeated, the name heavy on her tongue. "He's the one looking for Gabriel." Sarah nodded grimly. If Anna was hiding from him, it makes sense why she'd leave Gabriel somewhere she thought he'd be safe. She must have known he'd come after her, and her baby. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they painted was terrifying. Victor Delgado wasn't just a dangerous man. He was a predator with resources and influence that made him untouchable. Clara knew she couldn't run forever. She needed a plan, something that would protect Gabriel and expose the truth about Delgado. But she couldn't do it alone. That evening, Clara met with a lawyer Sarah recommended, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena who specialized in cases involving domestic violence and corruption. Elena listened intently as Clara explained the situation, her expression hardening with every detail. "If what you're saying is true, Delgado won't stop until he gets what he wants," Elena said. "But if we can prove his involvement in Anna's disappearance and connect it to Gabriel, we might have a chance to take him down." Clara hesitated. "And what happens to Gabriel?" "We'll petition for you to have temporary custody while we investigate," Elena assured her. "But you need to be prepared for a fight. Delgado won't go down easily." The next few days were a whirlwind. Clara provided statements, handed over the locket as evidence, and worked closely with Elena to build a case against Delgado. Every step felt like a gamble, each move bringing them closer to the truth and to danger. One night, as Clara rocked Gabriel to sleep, her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "We have enough. Meet me at the courthouse tomorrow." Relief and fear washed over her in equal measure. This was it, the moment they had been working toward. The next morning, Clara stood outside the courthouse, clutching Gabriel tightly. Reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras flashing as whispers of Delgado's name filled the air. Clara's heart pounded as she stepped inside. knowing this was her chance to ensure Gabriel's safety and bring justice for Anna. The hearing was tense, with Delgado's lawyers attempting to discredit the evidence. But Elena was relentless, presenting the locket, Anna's restraining order, and testimony from witnesses who had seen Delgado threaten her. Finally, after hours of deliberation, the judge ruled in Clara's favor. Delgado was ordered to face further investigation for his crimes, and Clara was granted custody of Gabriel. As she stepped out of the courthouse, Gabriel asleep in her arms, Clara felt a weight lift from her chest. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt hope. Back at home that evening, Clara decorated the small Christmas tree she had set up in the corner of the living room. She placed the locket on one of the branches, its inscription gleaming in the warm light. Forever protected. Sitting by the tree with Gabriel in her lap, Clara whispered, "You're safe now. And I promise, no one will ever take you away." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the world in quiet peace. Inside, Clara held Gabriel close, her heart full of love and determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together. Don't miss out on our next heartwarming story. Subscribe now and join us for more unforgettable journeys filled with emotion, hope, and magic. Hit the bell to stay connected. You won't want to miss what's coming next.